always clean this off first, and then we put this where the light is going to hit our subject. Apply a little bit there. And around the windows. This is really great help as this will dry, and then we rub this out when it's dried, and this will expose our fabulous little details. And this is a little duster hanging up on a washing line right across here and on some of the leaves. Here we are. I think that's complete. And then let it dry. So we've just, it might confuse you when you go in and buy some of this because it says acrylics, but acrylics will go in under watercolours and work perfectly well with watercolour washes. There we are. And now I'm going to leave that to dry and just splash this over the wall area. So this is almost like a wet into wet all over here. Push this all over here. So very wet, still yellow ochre. All around the window, so suddenly the shape begins to make sense. And you can see the texture paste just coming through now. And around the greenery, quickly showing up through the negative shapes, the actual greenery and flowers. Around there. And then just before it dries, we need to drop in some grey. There we go. And that goes round the crevices formed by the texture paste. And then we let that dry for a moment. And around we go, the bottom of the window, between the leaves. A little bit more yellow ochre. This is old walls. These are old walls, so that they're going to be a little bit weathered and not very perfect. Around here and circulating all the way around. And I'm going to put just a little bit of burnt sienna in there as well. I think that could just do with a bit of warmth before it dries. And adding some more over here. There we are. This has got to be quite quick because otherwise it's all going to dry and you'll have some hard edges which we don't want. Right the way around there. There. Dropping some more grey into there. And we'll tidy this up a little bit later on. And a bit of burnt sienna. There. So I'm using my brush on its edge. There we are. It doesn't have to be too perfect, but it just shows the lovely deep recesses of the window. We go round the little dishcloth. There we are. And doing that space, butting up to the greenery and the flowers, and over the other side. There we are, and around the pegs. Some of the colour doesn't completely mix together, which is better, because then you get a variation of the burnt sienna and the blue. One of them can be a little bit stronger. So letting that dry, we go to a different place on the painting and paint in the shutters. Now this is a very pale grey, watered down with a little cerulean blue. So I'm putting that colour right over this area. So some of the cerulean blue will come out in places a little bit more intensely, and the other will be greyer. Right. Round we go there, and then round the leaves so they become very obvious. And under, over to the other side. Press hard on the brush, and that does it in one stroke. There we go, around there. Yes, shutters come in all different shapes and sizes, but I'm trying to keep this one fairly simple. Now, on the top of the window there is a structure, and I'm going to make that a little more obvious with burnt sienna and a touch of the blue, and just make some squares, little blocks there, and around some of the stonework, so it looks a little bit more random, a little bit more older and a bit more weathered. There we go. So this is still burnt sienna and a touch of the Windsor blue, and over to the other side. There we are. There we go. Lovely dark inside, underneath the window, right inside there. So it gives a three-dimensional look to the window, and it starts coming out towards you a little bit. And that comes out through there and down over here like that, and down over the inside of the window. There we are. That's the fall of the shadow inside the recess of the window. There we are. Pull this down through here, and then we get the details of the window just put in quickly, but we're going to leave some of the white paper, and this is beautiful in a watercolour painting. Some of the white paper can be the most delicious of all. That can go under there. Violet makes a beautiful shadow colour if it's mixed with this blue. And if it's too intense, I sometimes put some burnt sienna in it. There we go, through there. Underneath the window, there, and across there and there. I'm adding just a little bit of yellow ochre down through here. So we're getting some darker colours in there. And then again some more leaves here. Trying to do it fairly free, but with those variations of tone which makes it much more natural looking. There we go. Kind of flick it with the brush and try to get the massed look as well as the individual leaves. Here we are. I'm going to put a bit of burnt sienna in there to get a variation on that. There we go. So we've got quite a lot of massed leaves there, and some more here. So we've got, again, a variety of different heights of these plants, and then splash some colour in a minute. So we've got those. I'm going to put some bright pinky colour in there. So we've got some pinky flowers, and adding a little bit of orangey colour to it. So we've got sunlight on these plants as well, and then lifting a bit of that colour, bringing it elsewhere. I've got a nice colourful corner over there. And I'm going to bring some of this colour over onto the dishcloth. Here we are. A little bit of shadow on there. Perhaps it goes in under there and around there. Under here a bit more. Under here, there, there, and just in under there. And another wash of shadow right in underneath here and against the flowers, because they cause a fabulous kind of design of shadows there. So some shadows in. Right, there we go. Then we're going to do some splattering, which is quite fun. This again is burnt sienna, watered down, and this ages the surface. So I'm splattering against the end of my finger with a loaded brush of pigment. Just ages the whole surface and gives a kind of pitted, weathered effect. Lovely. And then over the top of the window, just here. There we go. There. Isn't that fun? There. It gives a bit of character to it. Down the edge there. And then a little bit of more structure to the window. There we go. And a bit of yellow ochre just down here. And down the edge here. Right, that's gone all the way around the windows, and yes, I think we are all ready to wash off the masking fluid. So we'll stop and we'll let everything dry again. Here we are. So this could be formed by a yellow with your olive green, or a ready mixed yellowy green, whichever one you have. And then a bit of orange onto the flowers. These are gentle washes so that you don't flood the whole area, and the masking fluid just shows through as a design through there. There we go. There we go. And the little dishcloth just catches the edge of the sunlight. There we go. And a deeper recess shadow on the edge here. Here we go. And it doesn't matter if it runs a bit, because shadows do go into crevices, and a shadow underneath the shutter. Darker piece there, and a darker piece under there. A bit of dark at the edge and down here. So we've got some more detail lurking in the shadows there. I'm going to do the texturing of the windows, and this is burnt sienna with a little bit of the light cerulean blue, and I'm using the edge of the brush going down right and defining the planking of the shutter there. I know it's going over, wiggling a bit, but I think it looks natural, more natural, if you do wiggle it around a bit and then just soften the edges with some water. There we are. And the same the other side. Breaking the line again. And there we are. Bit more. So this is burnt sienna and blue. And if you're a bit adventurous, you could put some orange, an orange hinge on there. That's ready mix orange with a little burnt sienna, and over on the other side as well. And you could sneak a little bit of oozing rust into the wood and drag it down with your fingers. And with addition of the burnt sienna, you could put some holes, a little bit of blue, I think, a few holes, nail holes in that. There we go. I want to put just a very, very quick on just a little bit of this, so that it's not completely stark white, but nearly. I'm putting an extra bit just down here and soften this bit here. Just a few little dots of dark, just to give a little bit more structure to the flowers. And just darken this little bit up just slightly. Yeah. Then into more depth, and that's going to make it much more realistic. There we go. And then I'm going to put some more shadows around the plants. There we go, just put a few more in there. And perhaps a little bit of shadow on the edge down here as well. Yeah. These last details are quite important. Just these little accents of darks make all the difference to making it look finished and realistic. I'm putting a bit of alizarin crimson into the flowers, so there's a bit more structure there. So these plants have got more structure there. There we go. And perhaps a bit of detail on here, makes it a bit more fun. And a spot more orange onto the hinge. And a bit of shadow under here, bit of blue under here. What about a little hook here for the window? This hooks back the shutters. There we are. And just to enforce the nail heads there. That goes there. A little wash just down here to varying the colour. All acrylics, of course, in a watercolour way. So wash those on. And this is a pink with cadmium, red and white. Wash this right down into the water. The rule is whatever's up there comes down into the water. Perhaps a lovely streak of yellow into there. A bit more yellow the other side. That yellow echoing in the water. And some more pink. Big strokes. Down into the water. And this surface here needs to be just a little bit darker, perhaps with some burnt sienna, which will be slightly covered over with shadows later, but the vibrant colour needs to show through that shadow, so we want to put that in straight away. Perhaps a bit of colour there, a bit of colour there, and some orange around here. So it's vibrant, it is, really lovely and vibrant. There we go. A bit of light blue in the background. I'm putting some blue there, round through the back. Some chimneys and whatnots. I don't quite know what it is, but just put that into the background and wash that in there. And a little bit of blue in here at the moment. Some green shutters, let those run slightly, and green there, and green there. They seem to have got some quite lovely deep green, wine green. It's a lovely colour. It seems to be very, very popular with all their kind of shutters. And some green for the shadow under the bridge. I'm getting a hooker's green and a touch of yellow in there. Wiggle it again for the movement of the water, and a violet and a bit of green for underneath the bridge. There we go. And that will be just a little bit of reflection in there. And a little bit of yellow ochre perhaps under there. Bit of reflected light, which makes it not quite so dead and dense. Put a bit of green there. And a slight dark line there. Bringing in some orange and burnt sienna at the bottom here. And softening it there. The bridge needs a bit of attention, so I'm putting some violet and burnt sienna with a touch of the green into this section. There we are, fill that there. And place in just a few green doors at the back. There, into the water. Into the water, and we'll let that dry. There. Using the number 8 brush again, I'm going to paint in a few of the areas with the shadows, just to give it again a little bit more form, and inside the windows, inside that window and underneath there. So this is a violet and a touch of blue. And if you find that that shadow colour is not quite right, put in a little bit of burnt sienna, and that just takes the brightness away. So putting that colour in there, that colour over there, putting some burnt sienna in over the top here, and washing that over, because the masking fluid has got to show up in this area because it's the railings for the bridge. So we soften that, then get some blue, violet, tiny touch of burnt sienna, and wash in this side over the light and down that edge. So that edge is in contrast to that. The railings and the edge of the structure of the bridge will also show up. I'm going to put in some slight reddy colour, a bit of cadmium red, just around here. Bit of colour there, bit of colour down there, I think, and into the water. So we've got some extra vibrant colours. Now that won't show up down there so much. And then some greenery into the window boxes. And with a smaller brush, I'm just going to drop some red geraniums in there and on the top there. And a few streaks of texture in here. So you don't have to be too careful. But that's grey and a dab of cadmium red. Venice is full of decaying brickwork, but it's beautiful for us painters, but not so good for the structure of the building. This is grey, just a little bit more grey there, and dabbing some texture into there. Bigger brush again, washing that. There, and I think we're just a little touch of blue in there. Oh, and in there. Tiny touch of blue at the back. Bit bluer. Just put the last coating of the paint on there, and then we'll wait until it dries, and then we can rub off the masking fluid. With my number 4 brush, I'm going to wash in a bit of brighter colour, orangey yellow, just on the edge here. The top of the window, over the shutters on both sides, so it's got a glow. Acrylics are beautiful for doing a glow, as the bottom layer, of course, because it's dry, won't stir up at all. Glow all the way down into the water. Now, if you don't want it quite so bright, I'm putting some yellow ochre, so it's just softening, but not quite as bright as in the other areas. I'm going to leave this nice and light because that's actually catching the sun. And these blue, because they are in the shadows. This is cobalt blue with a tiny touch of violet. And those shapes fall right back into the shadows. Taking this with it as well. And I'm going to put a bit of blue in on the back here. A little bit of blue in there. A little bit there. Perhaps not quite so much as there. And dab a bit of that out because I want it to be a bit more sunny just there. Blue across this edge and blue down here. And taking this violety blue, I'm going to put even darker at the back. So this will take this edge further back here and bring this further forward. There. And some shadows under here. Some shadows down here. This is what brings the whole picture alive when you start putting these shadows in. That can be darker. Bits of yellow. And this is where you can do it quite thickly if you want to. Blobs of colour, nice and thick. Right. I'm going to put just a little bit of detail into here. Don't want to lose that too much. And I'm going to put a bit more shadow over there, lifting it slightly because I put it in a bit too dense. That's better. Out there. Sometimes if it sticks, you can put a bit of water on there and lift it. There we are, that's better. A bit dark in there. A bit dark inside there. A bit of dark in there. Still a bit darker in there. And I wanted to put just a bit of palette knife work in over here. And some bricks. So that just breaks up the surface. Makes it a bit more interesting. Bright orange and white. You can bring a bit more light in there, and some light across here. There we go. So it's lovely and thick and buttery. Scratch it through there and pull it down. Perhaps a little bit lighter just the other side. A bit more texture on there. A little bit of texture down here. Going to put just a bit more details into here. So the railings have got a bit of light and shade on them. That crosses there. It's got a bit more shadow on there. This has got just some light bits. Flick of light in there. In there. There's also some reflected light just dragged over here as well. Even a dark shadow has some light places and objects within it. You don't like it doesn't have to be dense and dark all over. Just these areas that are quite important. There we are. Just drag that over the top. And there's a lightish area in underneath there that can be dragged down, catching the light. Bit of light there. And a nice light area on the top. There we go. last bit of detail in. Put this bit of light there, perhaps a bit of detail there. A window at the back. Some details there, perhaps another bit there. Here. And dragging a bit more light into that shadow. There we go. So the light is just reflected perhaps off the bridge. Around here a bit more, and just sharpening that edge up. Getting some tiny little bit of yellow down here. There we go. Down we go. Just drag this bit across there. Trying to keep this quite straight looking, and just drag a little bit more of that into the shadowed area. A little bit over the bridge, down here. There. Straighten that up a bit more. Last tiny little detail with this and the edge. There. And this is with the small number 4 edges of the barn door, which are lovely curved feature here. And as you can see, I've added a cockerel and a chicken just for some interest, and it usually forms a lovely focal point. And big feet there, securing it to the top of the door frame. There's some chicken wire that needs to be drawn in. You need to do this fairly carefully because it needs to look like chicken wire. So it follows the structure. Complete this side, and the hinge, and the edge of the door here. Put a few grasses, and I think that completes the lovely patterns the texture paste makes. There, around we go there. Lifting a small area for the greenery. Splodge of grey there. A bit of green on there. There we go. So it's a mixture of grey, a little bit of green, burnt sienna and yellow ochre. Up to the edge of the barn door. Around the vine shapes. There we go. Dropping a bit of burnt sienna in there. This works beautifully against the greenery. Bit of grey. So hopefully we'll get that kind of ageing effect. And I put some splattering on in a minute. Put this yellow ochre there. So it's quite colourful, the stonework. Right down to the ground. Little bits of green gungy bits in there, like lichen or verdigris or something like that. So we're going to put the leaves in next, a yellowy green with a touch of olive green in it. Put these over the yellow, adds a bit of warmth to it. And then into the spaces I've already left. It doesn't matter again if it runs, let it run a bit. Yellowy green. So it's kind of a massed shape, but also there'll be separate leaves in a minute too when I put the background in. On the other side, yellowy green, a few separated leaves and a massed shape. It gives a more convincing look if you do that. So we've got some shadowy colours, perhaps a little bit of blue with it. Round we go. Bit more green. See, it's running a bit into the background, and that doesn't matter. In fact, it's better if that happens. It's more beautiful, watercolour is when it oozes into other layers and washes. Then we've got some blue in there. Now I'm going to get some dark, and I'm going to put some deliberate dark shapes right in behind these leaves. Makes it more dramatic. And around the leaves. There we go. So it defines some of the edges and gives depth and form to the others. You can't keep painting each leaf separately, otherwise you'll be here forever. Putting those in there. There we go. Round here, and quite strong colours as it goes towards the ground. A little bit more in here. A lot of these French barns and houses have got vines all over them. Such a lovely contrast to the stonework behind them. Now I'm going to do the structure, which has got burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and I'm going to put that's the reveal of the barn door. There. So got something in there. And another shape here. There, down it comes. And some lines of the brickwork. There we go. Perhaps a few here. Just defining a few of the big slabs. Shape tucks in behind, and this is burnt sienna and a dark blue, say Windsor blue, makes a fantastic dark. There we are, there's the cockerel shape, and some of these dark splashes can go in behind the leaves. There we are. I can make some of it a little bit more warmer, so burnt sienna is a little bit more dominant. And that goes in behind again, these windows and the leaves. There we go. Again, you can vary the strength of the tone by putting a bit more water in there so it's not quite so strong. You don't always have to have that darkness everywhere in those windows. And get a little bit more blue to complete this set of deep window shapes. That edge and the shadow under the doorway, and aged and rotten. Right, just get that top bit in and then we'll let it dry for a few minutes. Right, shall we let it rest and dry? There we go. Doesn't matter if it goes over the chicken. And then I'm going to put some darker colour, same colour, but with a little mixture of blue on it. And then just put some washes, just breaking that up over the surface. And I'm going to splatter some stones into the wet surface so that they dissolve slightly and look like small stones and pebbles. There we go. And then perhaps a little bit up the wall. There we are, and over here. And this is a mixture of blue and burnt sienna. There we go, very gentle. Wash this over, and then I'm going to start my cockerel. Now cockerel has got, I'm going to put cadmium yellow, a bit of burnt sienna, there, so he's got a yellow chest, burnt sienna and blue for his dark tail. Not too dark, otherwise we're going to lose the whole of his shape into the background, aren't we? So water that down a bit, and a nice bright coloured cadmium red comb. There we are. While that's drying, I'm going to put a nice dark shadow in above the door frame. And that's going to have a tiny, tiny touch of violet in there. There we are. And again, cadmium red comb there. There. I'm going to put some weathering on this door while it's still wet, and some lines of the planking. This is with blue and burnt sienna again. I'm going to have some streaks down the door and at the edge of the door here. I think that's partly open, that one, but it's still looking old and weathered. Using my tissue, I can dab that. Just softening things. And I've got some grass down here that I put with masking fluid to start with, so I have to put a wash over, gently put some water up to that so it softens, and a bit of dark in there. There. I'm going to put a little bit more dark under the chicken so it shows up, and a bit of shadow under the chicken. Then I'm going to put some blue over that because the warmth will show up through this glaze. some more washes over the leaves, and then we'll stop and let it dry. There we are. Just a few more squiggles through here. Right, let that dry for a moment. Bit of darker on this side. And on the bottom here, slightly round the chicken, so just a little bit darker so the edge of the chicken shows up. See, suddenly that light chicken shows up a bit more. Some yellow ochre over the cockerel and his feet. And I'm going to mix some shadow colour of dark blue, violet, and a tiny touch of burnt sienna, just a little touch of it for the shadows. And these shadows go over this edge, hoping that the original burnt sienna will show up just slightly through it. Down through this side, casting good shadows down there. Bit more shadow on the other side here. Violet, blue, and a touch of burnt sienna again. And bringing this shadow down over the wall. And you can hear it going over the texture paste, lovely. Yep. And slightly over some of the leaves. These will catch the shadows as well. There we go. The edge of this wall could do with just a bit of sharpening up. Yeah. And some shadow over here. Don't want to lose it completely, but we want to place that slightly darker than we've already painted it. Just little bits of darker shade over there. Tiny bit darker through here. And perhaps a little bit darker in behind the cockerel. A little bit darker there perhaps. Some dappled shadow, just a little bit of it on the side of this door. Fade it a bit. Get a bit of weathering look across there. Bit of orange on here, on his chest perhaps. Just regain a bit of his shape, and a bit there. Just going to place a tiny bit more yellow, cadmium yellow, there. And just let that dry for a moment. There we go. There. Perhaps another couple here. And also his beak. I lost his beak, so put his beak back here, foot back here. Draw in the brickwork. And occasionally just clean that edge off. Otherwise it'll blob and go a bit thicker. It's just slightly changing direction because of the perspective of everything. That's the bricks. And again, clean that. put some wording on there. It doesn't have to be too perfect. And a few bits of foliage and greenery, perhaps with a bit of texturing there. So this is feathery. Around we go. The spokes. A little bit of detail in the pot. Right, I think that's nearly there. Edge of the plinth here. So we put this colour on there. There we go, run that colour. Putting this there. Goes round the pot, there. Here we are. And let that, it's kind of spiky against the greenery it meets in the flower bed. And then we can put some little dabs of, just a little bit of violet in there. Put that. We can dab a bit, just a couple of dabs, so you've got even more variation with the tone. There we go. A bit more burnt sienna. This is going around the roses. Typical English cottage this is. Along there. So it kind of eats into that shape, but it's also hidden by the greenery. And just a little dab there. Over the masking fluid. Bit of violet, again, bit of violet. This goes down the other side of the door because that's a bar of brickwork. So it should all match up. There we are. Plonk a little bit of that on. There we go. And just a touch of grey there. There and perhaps there, so it ages it as well, so it's got lovely colour but an aging quality to it. There, so we're wrapping that colour around the bottom of the bike and around the greenery. There we are. It needs to be dark enough to show that shape up around there. So that goes in the full wheel shape there. And everything will be revealed when we rub the masking fluid off. A bit of cerulean, just a little bit bluer, so there is a variation on that greyness, otherwise that would be a bit too dull. And lose that into the shadow. Pull that over the paving slabs. And then we can get some dots and dashes of the cobblestones. Put a dab of yellow ochre in there as well. But you don't want to lose the shapes. So putting that there like there. And bringing again a bit of burnt sienna there because this is made of bricks. And around the greenery. Perhaps just a few more accents of darker bricks with the violet. It just makes it a more interesting feature. And I'm going to put some grey in behind this wheel with a touch of cerulean. these blank areas of foliage, but again, using it thicker and thinner gives you intense green or a very soft green. Washing that over so it's completely covering the wall, but we know that the wall is in behind, but we don't want an excess of one or the other. We just want a whole mixture while this greenery softens everything. You can add a bit of blue with your green for the shaded areas, which I'm going to do in a minute. Just putting that in behind the structure. Yep. And adding a bit of the Windsor blue to it. There we are. So that helps. Let it flow. The wetter it is, the more it'll flow. Don't be frightened of it. It just does its own thing. It can be quite fun to watch. If you haven't done anything like this before, it might be a good idea just to have a little practice on a piece of paper first. So that's olive green and a bit of dark blue washing into each other. And you can see the masking fluid. Look, can you see the masking fluid showing up? Yeah. A bit more blue in it. There we are. So it's sweeping round the bicycle, over the brickwork and around the porch. Yeah. You can lift with a tissue just areas. That gives you a softness as well. Just doing a little bit of dabbing there. And what I want to do is bring a bit of greenery just along here because there's too much brickwork. I might have to add a bit later on. And I'm mixing a bit of yellow in here to this green and putting a brighter area here. There we go. A little bit of cerulean, so we've got some cerulean and yellowy green. And then I'm going to add a bit of the original green with a bit of dark blue, so there we go. And before it's going to dry, I'm going to just put a spot of dark through the back there. So this is pure dark blue. And then we will allow it to dry. There. Mix those together. It could be even a little bit brighter there. There's got to be a contrast between that area and that. And then I'm going to put the bright red door in. I thought this was such a cheeky door, this one, with this colour. Cadmium red. But if you try your own door, perhaps you'd like to try a different colour. It really is quite striking. There. Straight down the letterbox, the edges, and around the flowers. I'll put some masking fluid on there so they're going to be protected. And that again will show up that shape around there. It's the bottom. And we've got this very interesting negative shape just here through the porch's structure. There we go. And then you can drop some different colour into that. So it just gives a little bit of variation on there, just a spot of blue. There we go. I'm going to put the greenery into this pot and sweep the colour around. This is yellowy, bluey colour. And then the geraniums are going to be a pink. So sweep that colour around there. And that can run into the redness at the back, but that doesn't matter, and I can take a bit of that red and bring that in to my green. And the pink, pinky colour, right pinky colour here. Drop the pink. Yeah, that's a lovely colour. There we are. Perhaps even lift that bit out, the tissue. A bit more. There. Now I'm going to do the bicycle, and this is burnt sienna and a bit of grey mixed together. So I've got to look at the tyres. They sweep around here, around there, and this bicycle is leaning up against the steps somehow. Here we are. And the grey of the top of the step, the back, and the plinth that's supporting the pot. And I'm going to paint the pot. This is going to be grey and burnt sienna again. In fact, I'll put that in. And put some violet and burnt sienna for the edges and the construction. It doesn't matter that it's run a bit. It's more interesting. Now, let's have a look. We just need to get some darks and lights against our bicycle structure. And I'm going to put the porch architectural features into this area. So it goes up against the tiles. Now this has really got to be fairly accurate, otherwise it will look really weird. And down this edge, keeping it as straight as possible. And along here, there we are, and in through here. Yes, this can be quite complicated, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. And a bit of burnt sienna there. Just doing the back of the porch, and then we'll let it dry. There we go, back of the porch there. Let a bit of green come over. Some greenery is just making its way and softening the edge of that. And a bit of dark in behind. And something's going on there, I think some kind of shadow. There we go. And yellow ochre and a bit of brown for the name of the cottage, and for the post box, just the edges there. And around your bicycle and onto the potted plant. And the edges of this flower bed. The next thing we need to do is to put in the roses. So a few blobs of roses over the prepared areas, and perhaps some extra areas, just putting them on. A pale blue I'm going to put over the bicycle, a little bit of blue. So we're just slightly losing it, but not completely. And then we're putting some pale grey over the area where the mortar has been placed. Not losing it, just a little bit of softness, and perhaps some yellow ochre as well. So we've got a variation there of warm and cold. There, so that whole area's been softened, and some orange on the top here. So that's slightly warmed up. And put a bit of grey colour onto here. A little bit on there. A bit of yellow ochre over this corner. So all the areas have been painted over now, and we just need to concentrate a bit on the structure of this porch, mixing some blue and some burnt sienna. So it's a deep, deep brown, and looking hard at my photograph here, I'm going to put in more structure. So we've got a little bit more of a foundation for the porch. A bit of dark there and a bit of dark here. I love porches because they're all different shapes and sizes and structures. There. And a bit more there. So we've got a nice sharp edge with a bit of greenery going across it. And we've got these areas in behind there. Funny little porch. Here we go. And the edges of these bricks at the back. I'm going to soften this edge just slightly. There we go. Just there. Tissues are very useful things, they are. And I'm going to just put just a little bit of greenery. Just behind here. A little bit of detailing. Soften with your fingers. And just a couple of little lines perhaps down here. Structure of that, and then dab it with a tissue so it's all soft. A little bit of dark there. Just a couple of bit of details in here. Bit of dark through the back there.